As Donald Trump's time in the White House comes to a close, we looked back on some of the most defining moments of his presidency. We narrowed the list down to 10, but let's be honest, there were a lot of really intense stories to choose from. First, let's start with Trump's embrace of
alternative facts.
Over the course of his presidency, Donald Trump made more than 30,000 documented false statements. The line started during his campaign, but it didn't stop when he reached the White House. Here he is the day after his inauguration.
We did a thing yesterday, the speech. Did everybody like the speech? You had to like it. Right? So I've been given good reviews, but we had a massive field of people. You saw that, packed. I get up this morning, I turn on one of the networks, and they show an empty field. I said, wait a minute, I made a speech. I looked out. The field it looked like 1.5 million people.
In reality, crowd size experts estimated that Trump's inauguration drew between 300 and 600,000 people. When challenged, Trump doubled down, spending essentially the first week of his presidency defending an evidently false claim over a trivial issue.
This was the largest audience to ever witness an inauguration, period.
And establishing from literally day one that this was an administration that would lie about anything and everything.
The Washington Post and other fact checkers have found that Donald Trump tells more lies and falsehoods than any president in either party in history.
I'm the only politician in history that I've actually kept more promises than I made. Think of that.
We're going to save the coal industry. We're going to save that coal industry. Believe me, we're going to save it.
I promise that under a Trump administration, the law will be applied fairly, equally, and without prejudice. We built the greatest economy in the history of the world. Best unemployment numbers, best everything. We took care of the VA with Veterans Choice. You saw that?
I promise you I don't have any deals with Russia.
And that lie leads us to the Russia investigation. From 2017 to 2019, Special Counsel Robert Mueller conducted an investigation into Russian interference in the 2016 presidential election.
Oh my God.
This is terrible.
This is the end of my presidency.
I'm
And that is a direct quote from the Mueller report,
which contains the most damning evidence ever compiled against a sitting U.S. president.
All throughout the investigation, he repeatedly tried to stop it and cover up his wrongdoing.
There's a legal term for that, and it's a crime.
It's called obstruction of justice.
Though the Mueller report ultimately concluded that there was insufficient evidence to bring conspiracy charges against Trump's campaign, the special counsel found that the president and his associates embraced Russian interference and that there were 10 cases of potential obstruction of justice.
The president has repeatedly claimed that your report found there was no obstruction and that it completely and totally exonerated him. But that is not what your report said, is it?
Correct. It is not what the report said.
And now, reading from page 2 of volume 2 of your report that's on the screen, you wrote, quote, "If we had confidence after a thorough investigation of the facts that the president clearly did not commit obstruction of justice, we would so state. Based on the facts and the applicable legal standards, however, we are unable to reach that judgment," close quote. Now, does that say there was no obstruction?
No.
The report also led to 37 indictments or guilty pleas and 5 prison sentences. When asked if he held Russia responsible for any of the election interference, Trump said,
I think we're all to blame. We have both made some mistakes. I think that the probe is a disaster for our country. I think it's kept us apart. It's kept us separated. There was no collusion at all. Everybody knows it.
Would you now, with the whole world watching, tell President Putin, would you denounce what happened in 2016, and would you warn him to never do it again?
President Putin, he just said it's not Russia. I will say this, I don't see any reason why it would be.
So, to recap, Trump welcomed Russian interference in 2016, denied any wrongdoing despite contradictory evidence, and then sucked up to Putin when asked outright to condemn Russia. Beyond lying and corruption, another legacy Trump leaves behind in the U.S. is in the form of his judicial appointments.
will set records in terms of the number of judges.
That was true. Trump has appointed more federal appeals court judges than any first-term president. So many that his appointees now make up 30% of federal appeals court judges. Now, we can't forget his Supreme Court nominations. A few weeks into his presidency, Trump nominated Neil Gorsuch to the Supreme Court to take the vacant seat Justice Antonin Scalia left when he died.
We got a great Justice Gorsuch, into the United States Supreme Court. He is going to be outstanding, hopefully for many, many years.
Gorsuch was essentially confirmed along party lines and has mostly sided with his fellow conservative justices while on the bench. However, he has sided with liberals on a few notable cases, including upholding LGBTQ+ protections and releasing Trump's tax records. In July 2018, Trump nominated Brett Kavanaugh, a conservative, to take the place of Justice Anthony Kennedy, who was a swing vote on many important cases. 2 months later, Dr. Christine Blasey Ford went on record accusing Brett Kavanaugh of sexually assaulting her when they were in high school. Ford and Kavanaugh both testified about the allegation in a Senate Judiciary hearing. She was demonized. He went on to become a Supreme Court justice. 2 years later, Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg passed away, leaving a vacant spot on the court. Trump soon nominated then-Judge Amy Coney Barrett to replace Ginsburg. Trump and his Republican allies pushed for Barrett's confirmation to take place before the 2020 election. Many called out the hypocrisy of Republicans rushing to confirm a justice after criticizing President Barack Obama for nominating U.S. Circuit Judge Merrick Garland in his final year as president.
Now, Garland was nominated 9 months before the election, and you were saying then, 9 months before the election, it was wrong to deny voters a chance to weigh in. So if it was wrong then, 9 months before the election, why is it okay now, 6 weeks before the election?
The Senate majority is performing our constitutional duty and fulfilling the mandate that the voters gave us.
I want you to use my words against me. If there's a Republican president in 2016 and a vacancy occurs in the last year of the first term, you can say, Lindsey Graham said, let's let the next president, whoever it might be, make that nomination, and you could use my words against me, and you'd be absolutely right.
Despite objections from Democrats, the Senate ultimately confirmed Barrett to the Supreme Court just 1 month after her nomination. By appointing young judges to lifetime positions, including his Supreme Court picks, Trump has left a mark on the American judiciary that will likely be felt for decades to come. So, it turns out Trump kept his promise to nominate conservative judges, but it's one of very few promises he kept. A major unkept promise is the border wall between the U.S. and Mexico.
We're going to build the wall. Mexico's going to pay for the wall.
A ver, no hay escenario y además yo he de decir que lamento y por supuesto que no puedo tener punto de coincidencia con este posicionamiento que hemos observado de este actor político norteamericano.
In January 2017, Trump signed an executive order directing the U.S. government to begin construction of the wall using existing funding. Confusion around how the wall would be funded delayed construction. A political fight over the source of funding later led to a 35-day government shutdown, the longest in history. In February 2019, Trump declared a national emergency and ordered that funds appropriated for military construction be diverted to building the wall.
We will have a national emergency, and we will then be sued, and they will sue us in the Ninth Circuit. even though it shouldn't be there, and we will possibly get a bad ruling, and then we'll get another bad ruling.
He wasn't totally wrong. In February 2019, El Paso County, Texas, and Border Network for Human Rights sued President Trump for declaring a national emergency, arguing that he overstepped his authority. A federal judge ruled that the declaration was unlawful. There were numerous other court battles over funding the wall, and construction of new wall didn't actually begin until late 2019. That's right, not a single mile of new wall was built in the first 2 years of Trump's presidency.
The media won't tell you this, but we're building the wall, and we're building it on an expedited basis. It's going up fast.
By December 2020, only about 45 miles of new wall were built in areas that didn't previously have some form of barrier.
And I'm really good at walls, believe me. What I do, great.
On January 12, 2021, Trump went to Texas to claim that the wall was finished.
We've worked long and hard to get this done. They said it couldn't be done, and we got it done.
Though the wall was never finished, Trump managed to exercise his xenophobia in other ways. Through ICE and CBP, Trump separated families, allegedly forced hysterectomies, and deported dreamers.
Bueno, aquí tenemos una orquesta. No llores. Vas a llegar con... Mira, ella te va a explicar y te va a ayudar.
More than 5,000 children were ripped from their parents with no plan to reunite them. At least 7 children have died, either in U.S. custody or shortly after being released. At least 362 are now unaccounted for, and at least 628 have been effectively orphaned as their parents cannot be found.
Trump administration officials have been sending babies and other young children hold on. To at least 3 Put up the graphic of this. Thank you. Do we have it? No. 3 tender age shelters in South Texas.
The cruelty didn't end there.
Entonces no tuviste nadie que te explicó el proceso en español.
No, nunca.
The inhumane policies of the Trump administration extended to Dreamers and DACA recipients. Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, or DACA, allows thousands of undocumented young people whose parents immigrated to the United States to receive a renewable period of deferred action from deportation. The Trump administration attempted to end DACA, but the Supreme Court decided to uphold the program in June 2020. Dreamers, like DACA recipients, are undocumented immigrants brought to the U.S. as children, though they don't necessarily receive a legal deferred action period. DACA recipients and Dreamers have lived in this country for most of their lives and consider themselves Americans. People from both groups were deported under the Trump administration.
I've been in the United States since 6 months old, and just 2.5 weeks ago, immigration agent pulled me over, said I'm going to Iraq. And I refused. I said I've never been there. I've been in this country my whole life. But they just wouldn't listen to me. They wouldn't let me call my family, nothing. They just said, you're going to Iran, and your best bet is to cooperate with us. That way we're not going to chain you up or we'll put you on our commercial flight. I begged them. I said, please, I've never seen that country. I've never been there. However, they forced me. I'm here now. And I don't understand the language, anything. I've been sleeping in the street. I'm diabetic. I take insulin shots. I've been throwing up, sleeping in the street, trying to find something to eat.
In August 2019, a whistleblower filed a complaint raising concerns about Trump using his presidential authority to solicit foreign interference in the 2020 election.
House Democrats have finally crossed the Rubicon to a formal impeachment process based on a stunning admission from President Trump that he asked a foreign government to dig up dirt on a political rival. In this case, Joe Biden. That is an abuse of power of his office, and enough to get Nancy Pelosi to initiate formal impeachment proceedings against him.
The whistleblower complaint led to a House inquiry, which reported that Trump withheld taxpayer-funded military aid and a White House visit from Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky as part of a quid pro quo to pressure him to announce an investigation into the Bidens. The inquiry led to the House filing 2 articles of impeachment against Trump: abuse of power and obstruction of Congress.
This whole hearing turned on a dime when the president tweeted about her real time.
Mr. Yovanovitch, as we sit here testifying, the president is attacking you on Twitter, and I'd like to give you a chance to respond. I'll read part of one of his tweets. Everywhere Marie Yovanovitch went turned bad. She started off in Somalia. How did that go?
Well, I don't think I have such powers, not in Mogadishu, Somalia, and not in other places. I actually think that where I've served over the years, I and others have demonstrably made things better, for the U.S. as well as for the countries that I've served in.
Mr. Jordan suggested that the president did something none of us expected by releasing that call transcript.
One thing they didn't count on was the president releasing the call transcript and letting us all see what he said.
You listened to the call, is that right, Lieutenant Colonel? That is. Ms. Williams, you also listened to the call, is that right?
Yes.
Fair to say, Ms. Williams, a lot of other people at the White House listened to the call or read the transcript?
I can't characterize how many. I believe there were 5 or 6 of us in the listening room at the time.
And the transcript was distributed to others, is that right?
I wasn't part of that process, but that's my understanding.
So the president is asking for us and his defenders to give him a gold star because a number of people listened to the call or saw the call transcript and then he released it. The difference, of course, between this and, say, his one-on-one meeting in Helsinki with Vladimir Putin was it was a one-on-one meeting, and he took the notes from the interpreter, so none of us could see it. The point being, the president had no choice but to release a call that everyone had seen.
The main takeaway from the call was the president doesn't care about Ukraine. So we're going to have a tough road ahead to convince him that it's important enough for him to schedule an Oval Office meeting for President Zelensky and ultimately to release this hold on security assistance. That was the takeaway.
Though the House impeached Trump after weeks of hearings, the Senate acquitted him of both charges, allowing him to remain in office. While this was all going on, a deadly virus was spreading throughout China. Trump learned of the novel coronavirus possibly as early as November 2019 and definitely by early January 2020.
We have it totally under control. It's one person coming in from China, and we have it under control. A lot of people think that goes away in April with the heat, as the heat comes in. Typically that will go away in April. We're in great shape though. You treat this like a flu. Because of all we've done, the risk to the American people remains very low.
The Woodward tapes proved he knew that wasn't true.
This is more deadly. This is 5 per, this is 5% versus 1% and less than 1%, so this is deadly stuff.
While Trump knew of the deadliness of the virus, he was saying things like,
"It's going to disappear. One day it's like a miracle. It will disappear."
As we're all painfully aware, the coronavirus did not just disappear. As cases rose, personal protective equipment, hospital bed capacity, and healthcare workers' safety plummeted.
I don't know. I just feel like there's only so much anyone can take. I'm tired of walking into rooms and your patient's dead.
Despite insistence from healthcare workers and medical professionals that the coronavirus was a deadly threat, Trump continued to mislead Americans.
Is it possible that your impulse to put a positive spin on things may be giving Americans a false sense of hope?
No, I don't think so. Many doctors, and I've read many doctors, they can't believe the great job that we've done. The United States has also created the largest, most advanced, and most innovative testing program in the world by far. We've conducted over 200 million tests. Think of that, 200 million tests. more than all of the European Union combined. It's not even close.
The United States didn't have widespread testing until August, several months into the pandemic. Other countries, including Germany, South Korea, and the UK, had testing widely available in March.
I've worked and invoked the Defense Production Act over 100 times to manufacture essential supplies in the United States, despite the grim projections from the media 8 months ago where they said this was impossible. They actually said, and you saw that a little bit, but I could give you 2 hours worth of it, but they said it will never happen, you could never do it, it was a pipe dream. But we did something that nobody thought was possible, and we also did it where no American who has needed a ventilator has been denied a ventilator.
That's a lie. Trump waited to fully invoke the Defense Production Act until he was pressured to do so. This meant that a shortage of ventilators plagued hospitals nationwide, forcing doctors to decide which of their patients would receive the potentially life-saving equipment. At the very briefing where it was first announced that the CDC urged all Americans to wear masks, Trump immediately undermined the message.
So with the masks, it's going to be really a voluntary thing. You can do it, you don't have to do it. I'm choosing not to do it, but some people may want to do it, and that's okay.
And just like that, wearing masks became a political issue.
We will get together and do a citizen's arrest on every single human being that goes against the freedom of choice.
Trump's disastrous handling of the coronavirus led to more than 397,000 deaths as of mid-January 2021.
It really was an unmitigated disaster, what the Trump administration has done.
And while people died at alarming rates on Trump's watch, he continued holding rallies, campaigning for an election that he ultimately lost. When he was defeated by Joe Biden in November, Trump immediately upped his claims of voter fraud, which he had begun making in July. Though these claims were disproven in the courts repeatedly, Trump continued spreading his voter fraud lies, convincing his loyalists that the election was stolen from them.
If you count the legal votes, I easily win. If you count the illegal votes, they can try to steal the election from us. They want to take not me, but us down. And we can never let them do that. The answer to the Democrat fraud is not to stay at home. It was a rigged election. You look at the different states, the election was totally rigged. Democrat officials in the key swing states illegally violated their own state laws in order to enable, encourage, and facilitate fraud on a scale never before seen in the history of our country. If you don't fight to save your country with everything you have, you're not going to have a country left. We must stop the steal, and then we must ensure that such outrageous election fraud never happens again, can never be allowed to happen again. We're going to walk down Pennsylvania Avenue. I love Pennsylvania Avenue. And we're going to the Capitol.
After 2 months of the president riling up his base and 4 years of fear-mongering, a violent pro-Trump mob attacked the Capitol. As the world watched, white supremacists were enabled to wreak havoc on the Capitol building, forcing their way past Capitol Police, waving Confederate flags, desecrating sacred property, and forcing members of Congress into hiding. This insurrection on the Capitol led to Trump's second impeachment in January 2021. The attack on the Capitol does not exist in a vacuum. Trump spent 4 years defending and emboldening white supremacists. There's been a documented rise in hate crimes since Trump took office, and according to a March 2020 report from the Southern Poverty Law Center, white nationalist hate groups have increased by 55% throughout Trump's presidency. After the violent Unite the Right white nationalist rally in Charlottesville, Virginia, in which a counter-protester was killed, Trump infamously claimed,
"You had some very bad people in that group, but you also had people that were very fine people on both sides."
And when asked to condemn white supremacists in the first presidential debate of 2020, Trump responded,
"Proud boys, stand back and stand by."
All these policies led to unprecedented levels of protest, starting the day after Trump's inauguration, when more than 470,000 people gathered in Washington, D.C. for the first Women's March. The 2017 protest, which drew between 3 and 5 million people nationwide, served as a message to the president that women's rights are human rights. In response to Trump's long history of sexism, misogyny, and dozens of accusations of sexual harassment and assault, women and their allies made it clear that they did not approve of the man in office. Major pushback to Trump's words and policies only grew from there, from resistance to his anti-Muslim travel ban, to the student-led March for Our Lives, to racial justice demonstrations.
And I'm 11 years old. Me and my friend Carter led a walkout at our elementary school on the 14th. We walked out for 18 minutes, adding a minute to honor Cortland Arrington, an African-American girl who was the victim of gun violence in her school in Alabama after the Parkland shooting. I am here today to represent Cortland Arrington. I am here today to represent Hadia Pendleton. I am here today to represent Tiana Thompson, who at just 16 was shot dead in her home here in Washington, D.C. I am here today to acknowledge and represent the African-American girls whose stories don't make the front page of every national newspaper. Whose stories don't lead on the evening news. I represent the African-American women who are victims of gun violence, who are simply statistics instead of vibrant, beautiful girls that full of potential.
In June 2020, Trump responded to peaceful racial justice protesters, whom he called thugs, by sending in the National Guard. Nonviolent demonstrators were tear-gassed in Lafayette Square in D.C. to make way for a Trump photo op where he posed using a Bible as a prop in front of St. John's Church. Despite Trump's militarized response, several polls estimated that in June of 2020, between 15 and 26 million people participated at some point in racial justice protests in the U.S., making the Black Lives Matter movement likely the largest in American history. The 4 years of Trump's presidency were marked by lies, corruption, and fateful policy decisions that disproportionately hurt people of color, women, LGBTQ+ folks, and low and middle class Americans. The United States has been subjected to endless trauma over the last 4 years, from children being separated from their parents to nearly 400,000 Americans dying from COVID-19. Trump's leadership, or lack thereof, will have lasting implications. As we say goodbye to the Trump era, the U.S. will now be faced with the challenge of resurrecting our democracy, reforming our justice system, and believing once again that the truth matters.